Hello. My name is Nina. Welcome to my channel. This is my final video of 2024, and I wanted to do a reading wrap up. I have read 53 books this year. Now, I have to say, I'm filming this on December 27th, and I am like 100 pages from finishing my last book of the year. I think I will finish it before the end of the year, but I'm not including it in this video because I haven't finished it right now. As for now, I've read 53 books this year, and that is about half as many as I've read the past few years. I've talked about this before in some of my videos, but I have been reading a lot less than usual. So today we are going to tier rank every single one of the books I have read in 2024. Now, before I start, I rate books based on how much I personally enjoyed reading them. That does not necessarily mean that they're good or bad books depending on what I rate them. I've rated pretty bad books very high ratings because I read them at the exact good time and I have really enjoyed them. And at the same time, I have rated very good books a bad rating because I read them in a wrong moment or I just personally did not enjoy reading them. So if we look at the ranking system, that will definitely come in play here. That being said, let's look at the rating that I have. The lowest one is I Wish I Hadn't Read This, which I think speaks for itself. There's very little books I hope that will end up in this category. And then I have I Forgot I Read This. Now, I have a very bad memory, but still, I can remember most of the books, and if I cannot remember what happened in the book, that is not a good sign. Then the yellow one is You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is like, I had fun, but I have very valid criticism for a part of the book, or I enjoyed the beginning but I hated the ending, or something like that. Then I have Light Orange, really enjoyed this but nothing more. That's just like literally what it is. Like, I enjoyed this book, that's it. I have nothing to say about this. I liked it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I also wouldn't say that you shouldn't read this. It was nice. Then the Dark Orange is amazing, incredible, show-stopping, like really good book. And then the red one is one of the best books I've ever read. And I'm just going to start with the first book I read this year, and we're gonna go to the last book I finished this year. Let's start. So the first book I read this year, I actually finished on January 2nd, Legends and Lattes. This is one of those books where in the moment I really enjoyed reading it, but I have not spent a second thinking about it anymore. I remember what it was about, but I don't think I will ever really think, oh, I really miss that world, or oh, I really loved that book, you know? But I did really enjoy it in the moment, so I think I'm going to give this You Were Good, but I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. Then we arrive at the first series of the year. I actually read the first book in this series in 2023, and then I read the second and third one at the beginning of 2024, which is the Truly Devious series. So I read The Vanishing Stair and The Hand on the Wall back to back, and I really love this series. I enjoyed these books so much. I really like them. They're not some of the best books I've ever read, but they were just so enjoyable to read and so fast-paced and so fun, amazing, incredible, show-stopping. Then I listened to the audiobook of The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, and this was a forgettable book, to be honest. I'm not a Britney Spears fan. I didn't really grow up with her. I enjoyed reading it, but I have not thought about it, and I kind of forgot I read it. So that's going in the green category. Then we arrive at the Throne of Glass series. I have read a bunch of books in this series this year, and I started off obviously with the Throne of Glass book, and I actually really liked that one. I think I'm gonna add that to the amazing, incredibly show-stopping category just because I really liked it. I'm not a big fantasy reader, and I know there's probably much better fantasy books out there, but for me, this was a very fun read. Next, I read Word Slot by Amanda Montell, and this book was good, but it was not as good as her other books. So I enjoyed it, I thought it was good, but it was not great. Then I read a very interesting little book that I found in a museum shop, which was basically a short story collection by a bunch of different authors. They were short comics or like a mini graphic novel. I really enjoyed this. Then I read a book called I Hate the Internet, and this was a book where I thought from the back that I would really enjoy it, but it just didn't really hit. And until I scrolled through my story graph to see what I read this year, I forgot I read it. Then I read The Happy Couple. I really enjoyed this book in the moment, but again, I have not thought about it since. I can tell you a little bit about what happens in this book, but not like in specifics. I really enjoyed it in the moment, but nothing more. Then I read The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, and I actually was really disappointed by this book. I thought it was predictable. I thought it was not really that interesting, and it was also not necessarily great writing. So it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. Then we reach another 3-part series that I read this year, and I read it all in one go, and that is the Inheritance Games series. I did not enjoy this as much as Truly Devious, but I still really enjoyed it. And in my head, those two series are kind of linked because I read them in the same period. And so in my head, they are about the same rating. So you have the Inheritance Games, you have the Hawthorne Legacy, and then you have the Final Gambit. Then I listened to Thank You for Listening, and that was actually one of my favorite audiobooks from this year. This was an audiobook about an audiobook narrator, and it's a romance book, but it's so fun. It felt very real and it almost felt like a crossover between a podcast and an audiobook. It's not one of the best books I've ever read, but in terms of audiobooks I listened to this year, I really enjoyed this. Going back to the Truly Devious series, they actually made a couple more books that are like in the same universe, but they're not necessarily part of the original series. One of those is The Box in the Woods. I listened to this on audio. I liked it. It wasn't very special. It was definitely nothing near as good as the Truly Devious series, but it was nice. Then I read Yule. I don't really know what to say about this book. I didn't dislike this book at all, but it didn't really stand out to me, and it's not a book that I have very vividly in my memory of like, oh, I really enjoyed that. I think it just didn't really emotionally grip me, but like objectively, it's a good story. I enjoyed it, but that's it. Then I read Good Material by Dolly Alderton. Now this book really disappointed me, and actually I really kind of disliked this book. I love Dolly Alderton's writing, but this book was for me just more of the same, and it dragged on. It was kind of boring. I did not enjoy reading this book. I don't necessarily regret reading this book because I do think that Dolly Alderton's worst work is still better than a lot of other books I've read, but I just did not like it as much as I hoped I would. Then we have Crown of Midnight, which is the second book I read in the Throne of Glass series. I like this less than the first Throne of Glass book, but I still really enjoyed it. And then I read Assassin's Blade, which is kind of like a prequel. Some people read it third, like I did. Some people read it first. It was good, but I could have gone without it. Back to Dolly Alderton, because I reread Everything I Know About Love, and that is actually one of my favorite books ever. I think it's incredible. I think everyone should read it, so that is going on the very top of my list. Then I read Well, This Is Exhausting, which is an essay collection, and this again is a book that I really enjoyed, but I just have no specific memory of, and I don't feel very strongly about. It was nice. Then I read Dirty Laundry. Again, I had very high hopes for this book. Maybe that's my fault, that's my bad, because I related this book to Don't Worry Darling in my head because I read the back and I was like, this sounds like Don't Worry Darling, the movie. And Don't Worry Darling was just so good. And this book just didn't come close. It was good, but I'm waiting for you to be great. Talking about great books, I read These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. Now, I had never read any Ann Patchett book before. I actually listened to this on audio and I just saw it on my audiobook feed and I was like, I love essays, I love like an autobiography, memoir type book. And this is a book that I've spent a lot of time thinking about since. This book talks about COVID in a very realistic and beautiful way, and I really like this book. Then I read Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home. This is one of those examples where I know this is maybe not a great book, but I absolutely love the Magnolia Park series. This is just, for me, it's escapism in the best way. These kids in this book are like filthy rich, like incredibly rich, and the whole book is about like petty drama. They're like cheating on each other, they're ruining friendships, they're ruining relationships. There's also like some real things that happen in terms of like losing family members and having to deal with loss in many ways. But like it's mostly just rich kids that spend their money in crazy ways, and when they get heartbroken, they like fly to the other side of the world, you know, those types of things. But I love it. I love it. Next up is 1,000 Words. This is not necessarily a great book, but I read it at the exact right time because I read this book when I was doing a writing challenge. I actually made a video about that, and this book really helped me to stay motivated to write every day. So it actually just came at the exact right time for me. Next is Listen for the Lie. I actually made a full video about this book because both me and Leora read it. This book was okay, but not great. If you want to know my full opinions, go watch that video, but I'm gonna put it at the "you were good, but I'm waiting for you to be great." Then I read Baby You're the Greatest, a short story on audio, and this I didn't rate this actually because I find it very hard to rate short stories, specifically because I listened to this book in an hour. So I don't really have an opinion about if this is good or not, but I kind of forgot that I read it. And I read The Husbands. Again, me and Leora made a full reading vlog where we both read this book over on her channel. Just like Listen for the Lie, this book was okay. Then I read Sheets, and Sheets is a graphic novel, and it's actually really, really good. It's emotional, it's sweet, it's cute, it's just a great graphic novel. Then I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price, and this book is a great young adult thriller. I thought it was quite new because it's about a person who went missing years ago, and she now came back. So you're figuring out the story alongside the fact that this has been solved in a way, like she returned safely. So I thought that was an interesting take. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't necessarily very special. Another Amanda Montell book, I read The Age of Magical Overthinking next. And this is one of those examples that I mentioned when I reviewed her first book, or her other book that I read first this year. This was just a lot better in my opinion. I enjoyed this a lot more. It was really great to listen to as an audiobook. It made me think. It made me think even outside of the moments that I was actively listening to it. So this is just a really good book. Next is another Throne of Glass book. I read Heir of Fire, and again, this was good but not incredible. Alright, moving on. I read Conversations with People Who Hate Me, which was fine. And then I read the first Twilight book, which is hard to rate because it's such a thing as a book, but I also made a whole video about this. Then I read If Only I Had Told Her, which is the second book. The first book is If He Had Been With Me, which I really enjoyed. And the second book just was not very good. It didn't really add anything to the story. I kind of forgot I read this. Then I read The 7-Year Slip, which is one of the books that I saw on TikTok that I actually ended up really enjoying. It's a romance book that has more depth than just a rom-com, and it was fun, it was cute. I liked it. The next book I read is Daisy Hates The Great Undoing, and this goes alongside of the Magnolia Parks series, but I like the Daisy Hates books less than the Magnolia Parks books. The main characters and the couple are just a little bit less interesting to me, so that will go a little bit lower than Magnolia Parks. Then I read The List, and The List is a very interesting book because it talks about being accused of sexual abuse. Basically, this book is about a couple who is about to get married, and one of them is a girl who's like an activist, and she's very active on social media in calling out names of people who have done things wrong. But then a list gets published where there's a lot of names, and then behind the name is like the accusation of that person or the thing they're accused of. Her fiance's name is on that list. And that in itself is a really interesting premise, but I just thought that the way it was done could have been better. I don't know how to describe it. This book just did not give me what I wanted from it. I don't know, this is not a whole video about this book, so I don't need to talk about it that much, but it was okay. Then I read Bloom, another graphic novel. This was good, it was fun, it was cute, but it was nothing that special. It didn't really grip me in any way. Then I read the first Bridgerton book, which is The Duke and I, and this is what I meant at the beginning where I was like, this is my experience, because I listened to this on audio and I actually really hated the voice that was used for the main character in this book. What's her name? Daphne. I love the show. I've seen the first season of the show and I love that. And I thought Daphne in the show was a very character of her own, let's say that. But in the audiobook, the way the narrator described her, or at least the voice she used for her, made her sound so innocent and childlike and tiny, and that just ruined the story for me. So I wish I didn't read this, or at least not this version. Then I read The Kite Runner because one of my best friends recommended this to me. This is a book that I would not necessarily pick out for myself, so it's very different from the books that I usually read, but I still really enjoyed it and I still thought it was really good. Another Throne of Glass book, this was Queen of Shadows, and this actually was a lot better than the other few books. It was like as good as the first Throne of Glass book, in my opinion. Then I read Sadie. This is another young adult thriller. This book was building up to like a big reveal at the end for the whole book. So the whole book I was like, I'm not necessarily really enjoying it now, but I think the reveal will really blow me away, which happens more often with these types of young adult thriller books. But then the ending just didn't deliver, and I was left with just this feeling of disappointment. I reread Normal People this summer, and I gave it 3 stars the first time I read it, and I read it again because I thought that I would enjoy it more now that I'm in a different stage in my life, and I actually did really enjoy it more. I love Sally Rooney's writing, and I thought this book was incredible. We're getting into the part of the year where I was reading for my rereading 5 stars books, so obviously these are gonna get high ratings, but the next book I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I reread that for that video, and that is one of my favorite books of all time. Then I read a novel love story by Ashley Poston, which is the same author as The 7-Year Slip, which I so very much enjoyed, but this was just not as good. It was okay for like a rom-com type book, but it was definitely not very good. 2 rereads because those were both for the video: Out of Love by Hazel Hayes and If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Those are some of my favorite books of all time, and even with rereading them, I still really enjoyed them. Next up are the Pumpkin Spice Cafe and the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore. These I also both read for a video. The Pumpkin Spice Cafe was fun for a rom-com. I actually thought it was pretty cute and it was very cozy and fall vibes. I enjoyed it, but nothing more. However, the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore was way too spicy for my opinion. I still enjoyed the romance, but it was just so much spice that I could not really enjoy the book. Then I read The Spell Shop, and The Spell Shop was really cute. It was vibey mostly. Like, I don't remember that much of the story, but I remember just the vibes of this book and everything that was described, and the town, and there's this like plant that speaks. I really enjoyed it. Then I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and this was the point of the year where I got into a really bad reading slump, and this book was just not the book that I should have read in that period because it made me kind of resent the book. It was a very slow book, and that just didn't help my reading slump, but also the fact that I was in a reading slump did not help my opinion of this book. I just wish I hadn't read it, or at least not at this time. And then the last book of the year so far, which is an absolute banger, is Better by Far by Hazel Hayes. This is the same author as Out of Love, and I loved this book. This is one of the best books I have ever read. All right, that's it. Those are all of the books that I've read this year. And looking at this chart, there's a lot more books in the top 3 categories compared to the bottom 3 categories. So I think that means that I had a pretty good reading year. I read a lot of books that I really enjoyed, and I only have a few books that I did not enjoy. Anyway, this is the end of the video. But before I go, I really wanted to thank you for all of your support and love this past year. I started my YouTube channel in February 2024, so I haven't even been doing this for a year, but starting this YouTube channel and growing it to at least where it is now has really been the highlight of my year. I've had so much fun making a video for you every week, and also seeing your comments and talking to you. Seeing that people are actually watching the things that I'm making is like mind-blowing to me. So thank you so much. I hope you have an incredible end of year, and I really hope to see you again in 2025. If you want to, you can subscribe down below, and then I will see you again next week. Bye!